This is meeting season at NACS. It seems like we're having a meeting every other week. What we want to talk about today is we want to talk about the HR Forum, the Human Resources Forum. We're not going to do a play-by-play. What we want to talk about is, for those who weren't there, what you need to know about HR and what it means to your business. Joining us today for the conversation, we have Julie Jackowski. She was the moderator of the most recent HR Forum, which took place just a few days ago. She also served as NACS Chairman and had a 30-year career in the C-store industry, now as a consultant, and law background, HR background, all kinds of background, perfect to guide us through a conversation. And again, we're not going to say, and then on day 2, this happened, but we want to talk very broadly about HR themes. So thanks for joining us today, Julie.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here, especially right after the fabulous forum that we just had.
So, short version, record-breaking attendance. And so a couple weeks ago, we had a podcast, and it was Convenience Summit Asia. And really, what we talked about there is we didn't go through all the presentations, which were very good, but it was all about the store tours and just how do you experience a new culture and see new things in a country that you may not visit often. It's through the tours. And with HR, when you talk to people, it was all about the connections. Yes, excellent presentations, exceptional moderation, but it was really the ability of HR people to have a safe space, because they can't necessarily go out on Friday night, hang out with everybody and talk shop about things that you'd like to fix, or how that Jeff guy, how do you fix his problems? So it gives them a chance to go talk about things, common things. And we're not going to share any of that. We're not going to talk about things that don't fit that kind of a safe space is. But what I want to spend a couple minutes talking about is, if you look at HR, there's 2 elements. If on one level, you might say, well, our HR department is just about compliance. Let's just make sure that paychecks go out, that all laws, as best as we can do, are adhered to. And then there's the other school of thought, which is the one we're going to spend the time talking about, is how all the presentations, how all the moderation, how all the networking really focused on what HR is, which is how do you grow people, and what is your seat at the strategic planning table, and all the challenges associated with that. So I've talked a bunch. Julie, how would you kind of sum up what the basic theme of the meeting was, both in terms of conversations, either on stage or off stage, in what HR professionals are thinking and what they'd like the rest of the organization to be thinking about?
Oh gosh, that's a great question, and a huge question, because I have lots of answers that, so if I talk too much and you need to interject, feel free to do that. I think just to start off, to summarize a little bit before I go to your main question, is the HR Forum. One of the really neat things about this is that it's we had record attendance, but we still limit the size so that people can actually make those connections, because it's really important in our industry. Folks outside our industry don't understand how complicated it is. It's a very complicated industry because you have so many different types of jobs and people, and you might be multi-state, that sort of thing. So this is a great way for these folks to connect, to make, I say make their buddies, their HR buddies, where they have somebody, a sounding board. And over half the people at the seminar have attended before. So they're coming back and reconnecting, which is really a cool thing. Now, when you got into your 2 points, I think you're right. Compliance. I'm a lawyer by trade, and lawyers and HR people have to deal with compliance. So that's obviously something that we go through some of our main compliance issues, in the seminar as well. But what the topic was this year was, how do we future-proof our organization? So, sure, there are tactical things that people have to do, administrative. But if HR really wants to have a seat at the table to really drive that strategic plan for a company, they have to think about how they're going to grow those people into the best positions, best skill sets, so that they can help the business move forward that way, and not just deal with payroll, insurance, the tactical things that they do on a day-to-day basis. So that's really what our focus was on the people aspect. And then the HR folks how they can even grow within their own positions.
So one of the things I thought was that there were a lot of really, really good takeaways. One of the ones I thought was particularly illuminating for listeners in particular is a session on a CEO panel. And so it was feedback from CEOs and COOs about how to connect with. There was that panel. How do you interact on an HR level? How do you set up? Are they strategic or are they compliance? And then there were other sessions talking about how do you talk to leaders so that you are thought of as often as possible as strategic. For me, I thought of all of that, it's like we need to speak the same language. And when oftentimes, whether you're in my job, communications, or in other jobs, you don't necessarily think about you're all speaking the same language, English, but there's different ways to come at it. And hearing that you have to really understand your CEO. Like if your CEO is tech focused, then think about how do you position things with a tech mindset. If your CEO is finance minded, how do you talk with that in mind? And I think that was a really interesting learning lesson for everybody in that room, regardless of position, that it's not, you need to get what you want and to get where you want. The most important thing is to make it easy for that person that needs to say yes. And it's about constructing the right language.
Yeah, I think you're right on with that. The CEO panel was, I'm so glad we were able to put that together because the last couple of years, from what I've heard, this is my third year of moderating, there were a lot of questions on, first of all, what's HR's role even in developing a strategic plan? But then once the strategic plan is in place, how do I even drive that? And really, I think what it boiled down to when they heard those CEOs, because I wanted the CEOs to come in and say, hey, this is how we do it at our companies, or these are things that have worked, haven't worked. This is how HR can become more involved. Every single one of them said, we can have the greatest strategic plan, but growing people and making sure our people have the right skill sets, they're in the right place, and they enjoy what they do so they can drive that plan forward is key. And who leads that? HR. So you can't drive that strategic plan forward without HR. The other thing that we had heard over the years, you have, it's kind of, a dichotomy of one set where they have a really strong relationship with their CEO, and they're in there all the time speaking candidly about things, and others where maybe HR sits a little bit more in the background, and those leaders saying, how do I get to my CEO? There are things I want to talk about. So I think that was really enlightening too, of the CEOs being able to say, look, HR is critical. Sometimes CEOs aren't trying to ignore you. They've just got a lot going on. So you have to figure out a way to set those meetings, and also bring a business case for what you want to do. I think sometimes HR leaders sometimes forget you got to bring the business case if you're trying to get a new HRIS system, you're trying to do new programming or new training, and how can that drive the company and the strategic plan forward? I think we also heard that for at least from the CEOs and COO that we had present, the HR person, they rely on them heavily to be an advisor to them and to be candid and upfront, not only with regard to, what they're doing, but are the skill sets in place that we need to move our plans forward.
Yeah, and one of the things, and I'm sure you saw it in your roles when you had HR as part of your function, it's really easy for anybody in any business. As soon as you see the HR person, you make some sort of stupid joke. It's like, oh, what did I do wrong now? Anytime somebody talks to you or something like that. And they're kind of, part by the way their position is, shut out of some things. Like I said, you can't necessarily be that person that goes out on Fridays and solves the problems. But what I thought was interesting, there was also a lot of conversation of how do you take, and this applies to not just HR professionals, but if you have an HR department, which means anybody, you have to also find ways to have HR understand your job. So they don't have to just understand their job, understand your job. And that could be like, how do you shadow? If you have some free time and somebody on the HR team has free time, talk about the industry. I talked with our HR person. It's like, hey, do you want to go to a store sometime? When we go on a road trip, do you want to go visit this and learn more and do some of these things? And where are the moments where you can take HR and show them what the customer needs. And then that allows HR to come back and create ideas and solutions, whether around culture or growing people that can match how do you connect with that customer?
I mean, I think that's an excellent point, and we talked a little bit about that, especially when you talked earlier about speaking the language. Well, especially as your company grows, and maybe HR, the department grows, can you develop HR business partners? Because to have someone that's a jack of all trades that understands every aspect of the business, they may not be as effective for you, where you might have somebody that says, look, we're going to have that HR person partner with the finance and IT area and our distribution area. Well, then they're going to be able to speak that language and really understand how those people operate, what skill sets necessary, how they can adapt their training and development for those teams. I think the other thing is HR really has to understand operations. The HR team are the ones who develop policies and protocols and push those out to the stores. I always told my teams, hey, if you develop a policy or a protocol that's going to take 15 minutes to do that, you have to take 15 minutes off the table from something else. And unless you understand how these, operations or whatever area you're dealing with, how they operate, you're not going to be able to do that. So I think that's really important that the HR team is involved in the customer-facing side as well, because they really have to understand that to make sure that the culture is what we want it to be for those customers and for our team members.
And then we'll talk about compliance in a little bit. But I think one of the lines, and it's in my notes, and I don't want to rustle papers because then it sounds like I have lots of paper, which I do. But it was something like, if everybody thinks your policies are stupid, you either need to re-explain the policies or say they're right and get rid of them. And it's simple things like that, whatever your function. If you're getting a lot of pushback on something, do you continue to push back at them? Or do you say, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this and we can get further if we don't butt heads on something?
Well, it's always a great question to ask in those situations. Why is this policy not working? I remember back in the old days, I thought something was really fabulous, and you go to the field and they had already adapted it, but they didn't want to tell us that they adapted it. And they said, well, the way that you rolled it out just didn't work for us in the field. Well, I've said, I want to hear that, because we're trying to, when we say policies, it sounds so awful, but trying to provide guidelines and instruction that's helpful. It's not supposed to, be a burden to these folks. It's really supposed to provide a roadmap for what they're supposed to be doing. So we love to hear from people, but you're right. I loved it when somebody said, gosh, if this is stupid, why do we have it? And I thought, oh gosh, how many team members say, I can't believe we have this policy. I think back long time ago when we had them in our business, and this was a very long time ago. In the office, you can't display your child's artwork on your, because I think they wanted all the cubicles and everything to look exactly right. And as you look around, everybody has artwork all over the place. Everybody's eating at their desk, and that was against the policy. And we're like, that's why you need to go back and say, we need to review policies and procedures, because there needs to be a reason for them. If there's not a reason for them and they're just old and antiquated, there's no need to have them, especially in the environment we're in today. People don't like to have a lot of rules in front of them. So if they're pointless or stupid, let's get rid of them if they don't help the business.
Yeah, you have movies like Office Space that do a good job making fun of that. But, right. if you say don't eat your desk because there'll be crumbs and then there'll be rats gnawing at your feet by the end of the day, then maybe somebody can kind of understand that. But actually, I more real life, I heard, whether it's true or not, Walmart, you're not allowed to display personal effects, because when somebody's coming in for a sales meeting, if they can get any kind of sense of who you are, they could use it potentially to their advantage, because then you're a human being, and human beings are more likely to be coerced into doing something with another human being, as opposed to if I don't know anything about you as a person. But, I think most places you don't have to worry about billion-dollar negotiations that happen in an office. So showing a picture of your kids is probably okay in most offices.
That's right. But hey, that goes to the human connection, right? That they were taking advantage of that to make the human connections. That's what HR is all about. So hey, they were working it. I like that.
Yeah, and one other thing, just talking about the vibe. I talked to people that have been at 10 HR forums, and I talked to somebody else who had been. she has been in her job, first time in our industry, three weeks. And she was at the forum. And I said, how do you register that quickly? And she said, hey, in the interview process, they said, if you get this job, this is the first thing you're doing. And I was like, kudos to that. But, it was just all of those connections that you would see at events where people would just solve each other's problems. Because like I said, you can't sometimes solve them with fellow staff because of sensitivity of matters. And I also heard you can't necessarily, there's other events, SHRM, Human Resources Management, they have a great meeting, but their meetings, I heard that, our space is a little unique. You're working more around the clock. You're working in all kinds of neighborhoods, and you get some things that are quite different than somebody that has a 100% white collar employee base. So it was really cool to kind of go from conversation to conversation and people just connecting. And one other thing I'll say about HR people, it's the only meeting, when somebody says, good morning, how are you? They really want to know how you are. It's not, they're not just saying 5 words. And then it's I'm from New York, and it's how you doing? And it's that means, hey, that's all it means. When they say how you're doing, they really want to know. And if you say fine, it's going to be oh, are things not okay? Really, really cool. The community that is fostered with this group of people.
Well, and it is a community. It's one thing that we did a little bit different this year. And this, the NACS team does a great job of taking feedback from prior years. And last year they said, you didn't give us enough time to just brainstorm and talk to each other. And so the first day we did more brainstorming sessions. They were organized brainstorming sessions, but I think that really set the stage for the next few days because anybody who's never attended one of these people talk nonstop, don't they? I mean, and they're going from 7 o'clock in the morning, and we end, with something fun, and then they're all out together. But those connections are made, so they can continue that brainstorming with each other. But you also see it just in the personal side of things, because there are folks that come that don't know anybody, and they're sitting at a table by themselves at the welcome reception, and you immediately see somebody go and say, hey, you're by yourself. You need to come over here with our group, or do you have anybody to go to dinner with? And not that we don't see that at our other, our other educational events, but this one is really unique from that. These folks are there to make those connections, not only from a friendship perspective, but to carry that on so they have those folks to brainstorm with on the outside. I think you also noted the safe space. Well, we warn everybody, don't share confidential information about, that you shouldn't be sharing about your employer. But we also say, look, if somebody needs to share maybe a challenge that they're having and they want to talk to somebody else if they've had that same challenge, that is a safe space. Don't go telling people at your company that somebody else talked to you about that, because it's really important to have people in the industry to be able to, kind of kick around ideas with. And so I think that's really key.
So want to talk about compliance, but in closing so we basically said, treat your HR people nice. They're really cool people, and
Absolutely.
Think of them as an asset. Think of them as a strategic partner, and you will find you will get a whole lot further as a business. So want to end by, let's go through some alphabet soup of some compliance issues that were part of discussion, or maybe a little bit, not part of the discussion. And I'll start out with the first one, DEI. And just talk about that. Now, there's a lot of changes that we're hearing in how that is being treated. And none of this is a political conversation. We're just talking about what you need to be aware of. How DEI regulations may change. And, we had a breakout, and, that wasn't one of the more popular ones, shall we say. And I think it's because it is such under flux that just waiting for guidance and seeing what the next steps are. But you had some good takeaways for the group in terms of how do you look at DEI and how that fits into compliance and in legal issues.
Sure. And, the first day we always do go through kind of like a really quick hits legal overview. So hopefully they took away from the DEI session and they said, hey, that's what I need. And that's why they didn't attend the breakouts. But I think DEI, we didn't want to make it political, but we also wanted to say, look, DEI does not mean that you can't have diversity, equity or inclusion in your mindset, that you can't have, say, a women's affinity group. It really is looking at Title VII applies to everyone, like it always has, and that you really need to base your employment decisions on merit and not quotas. And what was interesting for those listening to the podcast is that we do have, one of our sessions is we break out and people can pick one of 5 topics to go talk about. DEI was one of them, and it was Jeff, and you were there, and me, and the EEOC outreach education person. We're like, oh, we're a grand group, aren't we? But what was nice was we were able to talk to her, the representative from the EEOC, and just confirm, you can have all of that. You should be thinking about diversity and inclusion. And I think what she said, you want to make sure that you have those programs, but consider merit and treating people with respect and fairness, and you should be fine with your DEI programs.
So continuing with the alphabet soup, you started it with mentioning EEOC. We had a speaker kind of filling us in on some of the latest there. Did you have any big takeaways related to how people might want to pay attention?
I think what was key there is that, the laws really have not changed and the regulations have not changed, even though we hear a lot of scuttlebutt around. Title VII applies to all of the protected classes that, whether it's age, race, genders, sexual orientation, veterans, whatever it may be, the whole alphabet soup of all of that. But treat people fairly and with respect. And if you have policies and procedures in place for someone to complain, make sure as a company that you're following through and you're listening to those concerns and addressing them. But where I really think it's always fun to, I don't know if I say fun, but it's good to hear from a representative from the EEOC to hear what they also have available as far as resources. Because I think sometimes our team members forget, hey, the EEOC has training available for you. Written documents, they've got updates. Hey, go out and look at that, because that's where you're going to get your knowledge of what the EEOC is really looking for.
Yeah, and there were a lot of questions there, and maybe I won't say this as well as you might restate it, but one of the things that she said is one of the watchouts that you need to look for as an organization, if you are ever part of something that involves EEOC investigation, if it ends and all is good with you, oftentimes that point at which the investigation is over is where an organization is most open to another investigation because of the idea that it could be revenge or whatever the word is.
Or retaliation.
Retaliation, that's a much better word. Then if there's something that doesn't have that employee move up a trajectory that the employee feels is sufficient. So there are things like that you have to also be careful of, that just because retaliate.
Yeah, we're
different issues. Yeah,
where she was really going with that, and I think the HR folks would know this, but this is great for the business people listening that don't do this every day. Is she was really saying, like, say somebody brings a claim of age discrimination, and all right, maybe it's not substantiated by the EEOC and they don't prevail and they go back to work, and the company is not happy that they brought a claim of age discrimination and they're still employed. And so they fire them or take disciplinary action the next day or the next week. Now they have a retaliation claim to file with the EEOC, which, as she said, often is much more provable because you have written documentation to show that you took some sort of adverse action for somebody who filed a claim. So, and that's kind of been the experience for, past several years, that retaliation claims sometimes are more successful after the fact than the original claim is. So something for people to think about. Don't take revenge. Don't get mad. Let people come back to work and move on as if it didn't happen. Maintain the status quo, I guess we should say.
Yes, and there was another session that talked about there's 4 general emotions. You can classify emotions into one of 4 things: sad, glad, mad, or afraid. And it's like the mad one will get you in the most trouble. So obviously, but that's the one you got to watch out for. So we talked about a couple different acronyms. Now we're going to go to a 2-letter acronym and kind of wrap this up. And that's AI, which everybody always wants to talk about. And I was surprised that it fit into human resources, because usually, with some of these conversations about where AI is going, you hear that, okay, well, HR, legal, and IT have some real concerns about guardrails, et cetera. But seemed that overall there was, I think, a lot of ways that HR might be able to take advantage of AI and do it in a way that fits the business. And I was really surprised and impressed by that conversation.
Yeah, you always have the compliance side of that, where that was my job as the compliance person to say, hey, make sure you have policies in place and your guardrails, and you understand as an HR team or a legal team how people are using AI, because that's really important. But it was fun to see all the different ways people are already using it, whether it's even just from note taking or creating task lists and agendas. But really what we saw was people were taking it and really utilizing it for job descriptions, for creating policies. I think we'll see more of it with regard to the initial stages of setting up who's the best candidate. And that's where where the EEOC would say, hey, that's great, but make sure you vetted that where there's no discriminatory result that you weren't anticipating. But it was really cool to see how people are utilizing this. And I think the understanding that they already have that you can use AI, but you still need to do your homework to go in and make sure that whatever it spits out is what you really want it to be. And we talked a lot about it's so much easier to edit something than it is to create it. And so, I think, that was where I strongly pushed that of let AI create some of the stuff, but you still have to go back and make sure not only is it in the right format, but that it fits your branding. And so, I think the presenters did just an excellent job with that.
Yeah, and one other thing I mentioned that HR people are fun. There were also some examples where they used AI to kind of create a fun image or something like that to get you to read a thing that you might not think is fun, some a new updated policy or whatever. But if you send some fun little image that ties into the brand, and I think there was one example, somebody had their brand, they run it through some images and they have this policy about not having cell phones on. So they just created this AI image of a mascot that's looking very, very distressed that you're on your phone. So I thought little things like that are a lot more fun than saying, hey, everybody needs to get out their phones and pay attention.
Absolutely. I thought that was really awesome. From creating a Christmas card with like all of their stuff to, I love that, like you said, the one where they had the no cell phones during the meeting and they had their corporate mascot looking very stern with the cell phone in front. It was, it's just fun ways to use it. But, AI is it. I think where we really saw that as well is we were hoping to have some speakers on, more of the compliance piece of AI, but the regulations really aren't out there right now. So I anticipate next year we'll roll into that even more. So, we were just cautioned folks, use it, have fun with it, make sure you double check what's out there, but also remember there still has to be some guardrails to protect yourselves.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's going to be a big conversation. By the way, the HR Forum will be next year about this time in Louisville, Kentucky. I think we pronounced it right. I know you took great pains to pronounce it right yesterday.
I did, because there were some Kentucky folks out there, and I was like, I am trying really hard to say Louisville, and they're like, you're almost there. Like, that's as good as I can get. I'm from Iowa. What do you want? What do you want? Yeah. Right?
So anyway,
looking forward to it. It's going to be another great function.
So, like I said, we didn't want to really do a recap. That was a little bit of a recap, but it's really where their heads are. Your HR team, give them a seat at the strategy table. Know that they give them an understanding of your job. Let them have some fun in their job in that where they can. I mean, obviously, if there's certain places that you would have less fun in HR roles. But there's a lot that you can take advantage of in your HR department. And of course, I think another common theme is you always could use some more people on staff to do all these things that they want to do to make your teams have all the skills in particular to grow your business. So really great conference. I appreciate you being moderator for the conference and talking a little bit more about some of those themes that everybody can take away, whether or not they were there.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure to be there. And, I always say the HR people are the unsung heroes of our business. They work behind the scenes. And most of the time, they don't have high visibility, but we need to bring that visibility up and bring them to the table. Because I think if we do, we can drive that strategic plan and make the business even more successful.
I'm not going to say a better ending with that, so I'll just say thanks for joining us today, Julie.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.